So, speaking of employment, you decided at some point that you had been CEO for a long time, and the right move for you personally and the right move for the organization was for you not to be CEO.
That's correct.
Now, talk about that story, that decision. That's a big decision.
Yeah.
At least for the company.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for you. Talk a little bit about. I mean, you and I went through this together on a lot of those, but share that because I think it's an important moment, especially in businesses like in the B2B world where SaaS companies take longer to build. It's not like Instagram where you sell it for $1 billion next year. These things take time,
right? And
so it is a marathon. It's like an Ironman.
Well, for sure, that's a good analogy. First of all, I'll segue into that. I believe that entrepreneurs ought to do everything they can do to raise money when they don't need it. I also believe you ought to do everything you can do to find your replacement when you don't need to. Okay? So let me go back. So I started SAVO with Drew. He's a year older than me, so I want to point out he's the older of the two of us. I'm 44 now, so I would have been about 30, 31. And I'm just an all-in type of person, and I hope all of you out there are just all-in, because it's no fun if you're dabbling in stuff, okay? So you got to go all-in, and whether you succeed or fail, all-in is the only way you want to look back at it. It's draining, man. It is draining. My son was born 11. My first son was born 11 years ago. My second one was born 7 years ago, and I'm in the midst of building this wonderful company with great people, and I'm gone a lot, So part of just the personal part of it was, is this what I want to do with my 40s? I've done this with my 30s. Do I want to be present? Do I want to be a part of my kids' lives? Or do I want to be, hey, thanks, it's good to see you again, honey. I got to, head on a plane. And quite honestly, it was very much the former. That was a very easy decision for me. The challenging part was being an honest assessor as a shareholder. I think you always have to look at yourself as a shareholder. I think I've bucked the trend of most founders in that I stayed as the CEO through many of its iterations. I mean, to the point where we had 150, 160 employees and 3 rounds of funding and all that type of stuff. This was my decision on a personal level and on a professional level to say, listen, I'm not sure I have the same drive, the same energy level, the same gear that I know we need. We were on the verge, and our CEO, and I'll talk a little bit about Mark in a minute, has done a phenomenal job of the next phase of scaling. I knew the type of energy that would take. And as a shareholder, I looked myself in the mirror and said, are you the best guy for this job? I said, can I do it? Absolutely. I had no fear that I could do it. It's, am I the best guy for the job? And that's a question I asked myself constantly throughout the years. So I went to my board and said, I think we need to start looking for a CEO. And they weren't anticipating this. It wasn't something that came down from them. It was, no, you're great. You're great. I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And tell me more. But then when we're done with that, I said, I don't agree. I think the next CEO of this company has to have seen international expansion, who's got more experience in alliances, who's taken companies public, who's scaled human capital at a level that I never have. Can I do all those things? Absolutely, I believe I can. But I'm not willing to bet my shares in this company on my success versus someone that's done it before. So the best thing was we embarked on that journey together, myself and our board, knowing that we were not going to settle. And what was really cool is it was an unbelievably cool experience to find the caliber of individuals who were interested in this job. We built a great company in a great space that had a great reputation. We did, in fact, create a category. We didn't intend to, but we did,
or at least tell you what to raise money.
Until we were to raise money. Then we had to. We had to come up with a 3-letter acronym. And so we had wonderful interactions. You can ask any of the directors of our organization. Our 2 investors are Sterling Partners and SAP Ventures. Both have been incredible partners. Sterling from day one in 2005 when they joined our team. My biggest criteria was stuff that was inside. It was the DNA of the individual, the heart, the soul. Would they treat this company and its people like I did, like I wanted to, like I continued? By the way, Drew left the company to go sit on a beach a little bit back in 2008. So this is a couple years after Drew left. The most important thing to me was the DNA and, of course, the experience. We were very blessed to have Mark O'Connell come our way. Mark O'Connell was and is a very successful CEO. Had taken a company called Matrix One from next to nothing to a $150 million company, took it public, sold it, ran it, scaled it, did it in an incredibly respectable way. I got to know Mark, spent a lot of time with him, his wife, good people. And Mark and I think are bucking the trend of founder and hired CEO that butt heads. to me, that just can't happen. So it's been the right decision for me. It's allowed me to be a board member, a director, stay involved in the strategy of the company, but step back a little bit and enjoy life. Which
so talk a little bit. You talk about being on the board there. Talk about what insights have you learned about boards of entrepreneurial companies. What are the good things? What are the things you really want to have if you did it over again? What are the things you want to avoid? What are the insights that came from those experiences, both as a CEO and now as a founder on the board?
Okay, so if you notice a theme here, to all the entrepreneurs out there, until you have customers and revenue, would you stop thinking about your boards? Okay, it doesn't matter yet. Get customers, get momentum, and then so once you get to the point where you need a board, you've got an investor on. Of course, now you have fiduciary responsibility to build a board. I guess what I have seen is, number one, when you're evaluating investor firms, and maybe we'll talk more about this, think about the individuals involved in a deal much more than just the firm. The firm's important. The firm's going to be critical. But the people that are going to be on your board, the individual human beings, are like inviting people to your family table. Think about it that way. Screen them that way. I purposely caused conflict with Danny Rosenberg, who I love to death, and Jeffrey Moss, two guys at Sterling at the time, just to see how they handled conflict. They may not know it was on purpose, but it was. It's an Italian thing. Anyways, so a good board is one that handles conflict well. I would say, as an entrepreneur and as a venture capital firm, the faster you can surround your CEO with operating experience, the better. Don't get me wrong. I think investment professionals are critical. They're going to point out things that are around the corner that you never anticipated. But you know what? There's nothing like, as a young CEO who didn't even want to be a CEO but was just passionate about a space, to have an operator put his or her arm around you and say, here's how I did it. Here's how I would approach this. Forget some of this advice. This is what you need to focus on.
Fred Wilson has a great post on that where he's on a board and he said, he's obviously the venture guy. He's never been an operator. And he said, one of us is plenty, would become redundant after that. You may have to have more than one if you have more than one round of funding. He said, but we don't bring insights like the operators do. And I think that kind of insight of operators and especially entrepreneurs who've walked in that, so valuable. I mean, that's why you're such a
great example. Sterling Partners was an investor in a firm called Vocus. It's probably one of the original and very first SaaS IPOs. One of the reasons we wanted to raise money, again, we raised it when we didn't need it, but by the time we closed the deal, we kind of needed it, was to build a world-class data center. So Sterling Partners, knowing that, said, you know what, one of our seats is going to be taken by the CIO, founder and CIO of Vocus, who we never scaled a data center. I mean, we had some really big companies working off a server in our office. Thank God they didn't know that. And statute of limitations has worn off on any suits for that at this point. But we had, thank you. We had a world-class CIO taking a company public, built a world-class SaaS company, sitting there working in an operational role with us at the board, helping us scale out a data center. That was huge. And I credit Sterling for having the wisdom to know that, and me learning that's the type of board member we need. And by the way, the company evolved in its scaling, and that CIO, a gentleman by the name of Bob Lentz, he and we both knew that the fit probably wasn't right anymore. And so he stepped away and said, you guys need to go in a different direction. You need to get somebody who's an operator in a particular area. So I think the science of board management and art convene around people that you click with, that will challenge you. There's nothing worse than having a board meeting where people agreed with everything. It's like, kind of boring.
In case you can't tell, he never agreed with anything I've said in a board meeting.
Pat's like, yeah, thanks.
No,
but someone's going to sharpen you.
So talk a little about getting funding, because funding is one of those things that you have to do at some point if you're going to be a scaling startup typically. And when you do it, it's a big decision, and you're married.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that process, what your experience was, what you and Drew learned, and what you would think of if you were them, in addition to the person being the most critical piece, the woman or man you get on your
there's a lot of lessons here. I think what I'd say about funding in general is I'd never done it before. I never knew I wanted to be a CEO. I never knew how to raise money. I think if I took a finance class at Kellogg, I probably was doing my marketing homework in the back row. So I really didn't understand that world very well. What I knew was my space. I knew we had a company that was interesting, and I knew we ultimately would be needing money pretty soon if we wanted to achieve some of these goals we had. I went out the very first time. First of all, I didn't have time to write a business plan for a company. We're too busy kind of building the business. We never had a business plan. And I don't mean we didn't have a plan, I just mean we didn't have a plan. I actually hired one of my old bosses, the guy that hired me at Sundance Homes, because he was doing consulting at that point. I said, would you write a business plan for me, you know? So he went off and wrote the 80-page gnome, right, or tome that we all want to have and deliver and seem really cool with. It was so brutally off from where the business ultimately went, but we had something to hand over. And I went into that very first meeting with my boots shaking. I thought I was going to have to sell so hard, and these people weren't going to like me, and they were going to call our baby ugly and all that type of stuff. And when I started saying we sell to the top line of organizations, we got a recurring revenue model. This is 2004, okay? These are our blue chip clients, ADP, American Express, blah, blah, I kind of learned within the first 10 minutes that maybe the selling was happening in the other direction, okay? And that was very fortunate. By the way, we'd been in business. The number one thing that was compelling to the VC community about our business, I wasn't some known CEO. I wasn't like a 2-time or 3-time or proven entity. We had managed to bootstrap a company and make it profitable through the dot-com crash. That told them about as much as they needed to know about me and Drew, that we weren't going to waste money, that we were sharp, that we knew our market, okay? That was a big thing on their end. Second thing is we probably had 20 first conversations in the venture capital community here in Chicago, which, by the way, you're also fortunate to have such a better ecosystem here in Chicago today for raising money than we did. There was like 4 firms that you would want to talk to in Chicago at the time, and we were blessed to talk to all of them. And interestingly enough, we got term sheets from all of them, term sheets from the Valley, and term sheets from Boston. So literally I was like, this is going to become my full-time job. We made the immediate decision that if that happened, our business would die, in terms of revenue creation and keeping customers happy. So we culled it down to 4 firms. And we didn't even know how much money we were going to raise. We went wild swings. Do we need $2 million? Do we need $10 million? It was kind of these wild swings. We were probably the worst prepared raisers of money. In fact, Danny Rosenberg and I have gone for the last 7 years, or someone from Sterling, back to Kellogg, where we both graduated, and taught a class about that fundraising process. We actually give them the first business plan that we sent. And I hide in the back row of this class for the first half. They don't know who I am. And it's funny how these Kellogg students will sit there and go, who's the CEO? Where did they get these numbers? These financial projections are brutal, they're just ripping on me, They can't do this. And their management team, there's no pedigree, right? And Danny says, hey, that's great. And they rip apart the plan, and they say who would invest, who wouldn't invest, and you get a little bit of this. And usually like 20% say they would invest. And Danny says, cool, we're going to take a break. And then after the break, John Aiello, the CEO, is going to come on up. and it is the coolest experience because he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, you're getting a C, D. But the lesson to the venture cap, and these are all folks who want to be venture capital investors, is look beyond the business plan to the business. Is there a legitimate business there? Have they proven that they can get things done? Are there significant and different exit possibilities? In other words, if the business plan is we're going to sell to Microsoft someday, amen, I hope you do, but if that doesn't happen, we're all dead. If all those check boxes, SAVO had check pluses in. And it's a great lesson in terms of the reality of it. And then Danny, I will tell you, Danny Rosenberg, and I keep mentioning his name like I'm plugging him, and I am. He knew my biggest fear and Drew's biggest fear about raising money. And it probably is a fear out there for all of you as you're thinking about this, or will be. It works. Me and Drew just worked. When we made decisions, we shut the door, we whipped erasers at each other, and we came out with a decision, right? Now we're going to have a board meeting? What's a board meeting? I've never been in a board meeting. And so Danny was brilliant in his own sales process. He would have these engagements with us. He'd talk with us. He'd ask us questions. And it was this real comfortable conversation. And he'd go, by the way, John, we just had a board meeting. And I'd be like, seriously? Cool. And then he'd show up in sandals the next day, which felt good. And I was like, okay. And so he sort of demystified the process of the interaction between the venture capitalist and the firm. I knew right away after those type of interactions that Sterling was the right partner. And that's who we went with. And frankly, through our second round, they were our only investor as well. And that partnership is so critical on a personal level and a financial level. So